In this video, I'm going to show you step by step of how I paint an impressionistic seascape using the alla prima approach. I'll show you how I mix my colours, the techniques I use, and I'll also talk about my favourite materials while sharing my thought process along the way. Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be using titanium white, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, bright red, burnt umber, cobalt turquoise, and ultramarine blue. Please excuse my voice, I'm just recovering from the flu, or cold, whatever it was, it felt like the flu, and let's see if I've got the strength and energy to get through this video. So before I start any painting, I usually like to mix up a batch of colours that get modified throughout the painting, and in this tutorial I'm going to be painting an impressionistic seascape using mostly my palette knife, in the alla prima technique, also known as direct painting, where the painting is finished in one sitting, without the need to work in layers. The paint mixes are quite muted to begin with, and I can highlight the palette colours I have later. I try and keep the paint mixes in quite an organised manner, like the composition that I'll create, sky colours at the top, sea in the middle, and sand at the bottom, but later it'll get a bit out of hand and quite messy. For the painting surface, I'll be working on a 6x6 inch piece of heavy duty watercolour paper that's been prepped with 3 layers of gesso. When it comes to working on paper, I like to prep the surface myself using a large palette knife and lots of gesso. I wait for each gesso layer to dry, then I give it a light sanding down before applying the next layer. This way I have total control over the texture of the surface. There are a few different ways I start a painting. Sometimes I tone the surface, usually with the opposite colour to what the painting would be. So if it's mostly a cool painting, I'll tone it in diluted burnt sienna, so parts of that will show through the final painting, giving a nice warm glow. Or I might sketch out the composition with diluted paint and gradually work over the wet surface. But for this demonstration, I decided to start right on top of that white surface and jump in with the horizon, usually about a third of the way down the canvas. I use my muted blue mix, which gets a bit lighter towards the shallow area of the sea. Then I jump straight in with adding some variations of sky colour. For this size artwork, I can use a lot of thick impasto paint, almost like a sculpture moving the clay around. I just love this tiny palette knife. My paint piles mix in with each other throughout the painting process, and my mark making with the palette knife comes in a variety of directions and pressure, and I'm careful not to push down too hard in some areas. Clean, modern, fresh, and texture are just a few keywords that I would use in my new creative practice. I just love creating the illusion of detail, a painting that looks so refined from a distance, and the closer you get to it, the less realistic it looks. The blending brush comes in from time to time, just to tie in some areas. I don't tend to overmix all of the paint on the palette. You'll get much more interest in your paintings this way, and as you can see, the paint mixes are slowly becoming united. Or you could say it looks like a right mess, and you're totally out of control, Sean. That's fine too. With a nice strong pressure with a knife, I can begin by adding in that distant sky colour. This palette knife is so versatile. As well as grazing the paint to achieve a subtle sky, I can lighten the paint mixes and blends into the wet paints so effortlessly.
the trees, under the trees, I found a box of blackberries.
I can begin adding some of that cobalt turquoise into my sea mixes just for some vibrancy, saving my lightest tones until the end. Now I want a darker tone for the horizon, so I mix in burnt umber with ultramarine blue and a touch of cobalt turquoise with a tiny bit of titanium white. This thick and fresh paint sits easily on top of that previous thin layer that I used with the brush, and I can blend that across to create a nice variation of distance within the sea. For the shadow part of the sea, I use this mix and spread the paint with quite a bit of pressure as there's no paint underneath to disturb. I can then lighten it slightly as the colour comes towards the viewer. You'll notice that I'm being very delicate when I use my blending brush. Blending can be quite addictive with oil paints, and it's easy to get carried away. And now the sands gets the same treatment, starting with that darker mix and brighten it up as we get closer to the bottom where the shoreline ends. Now that I've covered the entire surface, it's time to get extra delicate and start working over the top with some careful applications with the palette knife. I can add areas of shallow waters within the deep blue that reflects from the sky and blend some sandy areas into the shallow sea. I just love being able to move that thick wet paint around. I haven't used any oil painting medium in this piece, just paint straight from the tube, and a lot of it. I also like to work on the painting as a whole, meaning that once the entire surface is covered with paint, I like to throw myself around a bit and adjust areas of the painting, meaning that I could add a bit of detail on the sand and then suddenly jump to the sky and back again. It might seem a bit random, but well, I am quite random, so I paint quite random, and yeah, that's me.
Under the trees, I found a voice of blackbirds.
It's all about the pressure with the knife and the angle I choose to use it at. See how I can glide my lightest paint mix along to create those eye-catching highlights. That's done very gently, and when I want to cut through and remove the wet paints, I can just use more pressure. Even when catching the tips of the waves, I can pick up the lightest tone of that almost titanium white on the edge of my knife and flick and pull the paint to achieve this effect. I primarily use oil paints because of their slow drying time, and I just find them really buttery and vibrant compared to acrylics, and I mostly use Winsor & Newton artist quality paints. As mentioned earlier, I'm working on watercolour paper that has been treated with 3 layers of gesso. It's a really great surface to work on. The paint seems to sit nicely and works really well together with my technique. Paper is also cost friendly, and I mainly use it to create small studies, like you're seeing now. I kind of like that spontaneous approach and the challenge of creating a painting in one sitting. It's also great practice for larger paintings. You never know, I might use this as an example for something bigger. For medium-sized artworks, I really enjoy working on cradled wood panels. I use these when I work in layers so I can build more depth with glazing and scumbling. That's a lot of fun, working a paint layer into a dry layer. To keep these layers flexible and fast drying, I use Liquid Original. For larger paintings, I'll go for canvas. I like linen, but also a decent quality cotton canvas works well. I don't like much texture, and I like to keep the paints in a more minimal style when working on large canvases. Let me know in the comments what painting surface you like to work with. If you were to ask me, Sean, why have you started painting seascapes and skies? My honest answer would be, well, I spent a massive chunk of my creative practice exploring many different subjects and themes. Illustrating children's books, wildlife paintings, pet portraits, abstracts, and even figurative, just to name a few. I got really obsessed with abstracts, so I would create abstract paintings as a design point of view to fit with wall decor for households. And that was really exciting for me because I had the chance to really explore colour theory, and play with a variety of techniques. But as artistically expressive as it was still looked at as a design point of view. For example, a client might view the painting like, those colours would go really well in my living room. But what is it? Well, it's an abstract piece of art, and many people would suggest that they saw something within the painting, which was kind of cool. I guess I was on the lookout to create something that could be identified as a subject, but created in a loose and impressionistic manner. In parallel, my love for animals started me on a journey to create a lot of wildlife paintings, which were seen as semi-realistic, and I would introduce an abstract background within each of these paintings. The truth is, I love a modern wildlife painting, and I love a modern abstract painting if it's created well. But I wanted to create a body of work that unites the two subject matters in a more natural way. I needed to explore something else, so as cliche as this sounds, just after Christmas this year, I went out for a walk and simply looked up. I began evaluating the shift in the clouds and different colour temperatures in the sky, and started to take photographs of the sunsets from the roof and got totally inspired. I'd also spent many years living next to the sea. It was something I had to dive into, no pun intended there. A combination of semi-realistic seascapes and sky with that abstract element seemed an ideal fit, and I've currently been working in the studio painting in my newfound interest, and I couldn't be happier with how it's all going. Still, I am a work in progress, and I must keep going and keep remembering that less is more. If you made it this far, then thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate your company, and I hope you've enjoyed a little dive into my new creative journey. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, then please do so and hit that little bell to be notified for when I upload my next video. And I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.